Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Poilievre. It's been a pretty lively campaign for you so far, I imagine, and we appreciate you speaking to our viewers out here in the West.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
So I'll get right to it. You know, one of the themes I see in general right now from a lot of people when it comes to government or the party as well and things like that is trust. People don't feel very trusting of government and politicians. I mean, that's sort of always kind of been happening. But in these tumultuous times, we've had a lot of that. And I did ask some of our viewers to send questions. And one from Dale Grab was about accountability. Like with the last leadership, we don't need to go into so much of that. But the candidate sort of proposed a lot of things one way and then didn't follow through later on, which I think kind of led to the change in leadership. But what sort of measures could we put in to ensure accountability in matters of transparency or even potential recall?
Are you talking about within the government itself or within the Conservative Party apparatus for its leadership?
There are two levels, yeah. I packed a lot into that, I'm afraid. Well, in the leadership and so on, your accountability would be to the members, and you're running kind of for two positions right now. So there's mechanisms within the party, and we saw those exercised recently. But I would like to talk about the potential Pierre Poilievre Prime Minister. What kind of measures could we bring in then to feel that you would be following through on your word on the way up and following after that, I guess?
Well, I was the parliamentary secretary in the Harper government that ushered the Accountability Act through Canada's parliament. That was the toughest anti-corruption law in Canadian history, still is. In fact, the scandals that have ensnared Trudeau are all the result of breaking that law. It expanded access to information, separated the prosecution arm from the political arm of government. It banned politicians from taking gifts from from people with whom they have government business, something the Prime Minister was also found guilty of doing. And later on in this campaign, I will be announcing new measures to get tough on corruption and expand accountability to empower citizens to hold bureaucrats and politicians accountable when they may waste money or defraud the public treasury. So I believe the government is servant and the citizen master, and that is what I will enact when I'm Prime Minister.
Okay, so when it comes to that transparency, I've noticed like Blacklock's reporter has been very effective actually in coming out some of those committee hearings and things like that, but sometimes they still hit a wall of redacted stuff or the old, toss a giant bill for an information inquiry. So would there be an intention to make it a little easier to get in and check on what is our government?
Yes, absolutely. I want to give more power for access to information and more proactive disclosure of government decisions and expenditures so that people know where their money is going and can trace every penny. There's no reason why with the modern technology, we can't have easily traceable government spending so that we can follow not just the dollar, but right down to the penny, what is spent and where it went. And that's the kind of transparency that I will enact as Prime Minister.
Great. And then maybe I'll move a bit back towards the partisan end of things. A problem we have as conservatives in general, and as we've seen a lot of conservative leaders lately, it seems, haven't resigned from their positions, choosing to retire. They've been pulled down by upset party members. And we're certainly in the midst of quite a bit of turmoil in Alberta with our provincial leadership right now. So this leadership race has already gotten off, to a heated start, and that's fine to be lively, I guess. But we do also worry that it might turn into something that could be fractious. So how can you maintain this race while differentiating yourself from other candidates, but not letting it get too divisive?
Well, everything my campaign has said about the other candidates is just factual and on the public record. Patrick Brown supports a carbon tax. He actually endorsed Justin Trudeau's version of the carbon tax and said he would impose it in Ontario. It is a public fact that Brown, like Trudeau, has been twice convicted of breaking the ethics law, in his case, the Ontario ethics law. And he's already attacking Stephen Harper, something Trudeau does as well. So I just disagree with him and that approach. Jean Charest was a Liberal premier who raised taxes, brought in a carbon tax, attacked Stephen Harper, and endorsed a long gun registry. So I disagree with those policies, and I think it's better to have those disagreements out in the open rather than have these two who are in a coalition together sneak into the leadership by hiding what they really believe and then thrusting a big surprise on party members after the fact. Your second part of your question was, how do we unite? Simple. We unite around one core principle: freedom. All conservatives can endorse that principle. Social conservatives want religious freedom and freedom to preach without censorship. Progressive conservatives want the freedom for women, gays, minorities, and others to live their lives in equality and without government interference. Fiscal conservatives want economic freedom to control their own money, start businesses without government blocking them. Libertarians want freedom online, freedom to own cryptographic assets and to express themselves. Rural and firearms conservatives want the freedom to own their property lawfully and without undue confiscation. So these freedoms bind all different conservatives back together. And so I will unite conservatives around freedom. And that's how I will bring together the country to become prime minister.
Okay, so we've seen a time when our in exceptional circumstances, our civil liberties have been challenged more than we've seen in our lifetimes, whether it was through pandemic legislations, ostensibly to control the pandemic, fair enough. And then with the short invocation of the Emergencies Act, how can we be assured, though, that, I mean, I understand the reason for an Emergencies Act is sometimes you just get something that's beyond the pale. But we want to make sure it's absolutely the very possible last resort for a government to go to. And people's confidence, I think, has been a bit shaken.
It has indeed. Trudeau is on a pandemic power trip. He caused this emergency by targeting truckers with a ridiculous new mandate that they had worked safely without for 2 prior years, even though they are the very people least likely to spread any kind of virus because they're all alone in a truck all day and all night, sleeping and driving. And he did it at a time when the rest of the world was lifting mandates and restrictions. So he deliberately provoked that crisis. And then he used the crisis he provoked to invoke more, to give himself yet more powers. I've been calling out Trudeau's pandemic power trip for 2 years, since March of 2020. I was probably the leading voice against his attempt to give himself the power to raise any tax to any level for any reason without parliamentary approval back when the pandemic first started. I fought against his abuse of tax money in the WE scandal, and I fought against his attempt to regulate internet speech and helped Rachel Thomas from Lethbridge stopped that bill in its tracks before the last election. So I've been fighting for freedom against Trudeau's pandemic power trip since the COVID crisis began. And I continue to do that as now the leading voice to end all mandates and restrictions so Canadians can take back control of their lives.
So getting to that freedom and an important part of transparency, I mean, independent media like ours has been on the rise and it's been turning into an alternative. You've already committed to defunding the CPC, which is appreciated, but we're worried a lot. We've got Bill C-11, I believe, that's coming forward now. That there seems to be quite a move on to strangle the growth and development of alternative media sources out there. Would you act to protect those?
Yes, I led the charge against C10, which was the forerunner to what is now C11. Well, I should give more credit to Rachel Thomas because she was the one who pushed, she was the critic. I worked with her to stop that horrible bill. And it's really unfortunate that the government-backed media and the corporate media want this bill to go ahead because it will further entrench their oligopoly on speech. They are acting as gatekeepers. They want to keep out the competition so that they can control what's reported and basically guarantee that it's government talking points that Canadians hear without alternative voices getting a hearing. That's why the media in the press gallery is so hard on me, because I'm fighting against their gatekeeping and in favor of freedom of expression and freedom of competition in the media. So yes, I will repeal C11 and I will repeal other bills if they pass that Trudeau is proposing to curtail what you see and say online.
Well, it's comforting to know. I mean, it's so important that we have these means to communicate. I mean, I understand there's a lot of misinformation out there, but we can leave it to citizens to determine what's
frankly, there's a lot of misinformation in the corporate and government media as well.
Absolutely.
There's a tremendous amount of disinformation that the press gallery publishes. So we want to get rid of disinformation. Let's start with ending that.
Great. So, I mean, we're coming from the West, of course. We're the Western Standard. We got a lot of Central Canadian listeners, but regional challenges, inequity have long been an issue for us out here, of course. And I'm of the old bent of the Reform Party way back when, and Senate reform was a very large issue for us. I mean, the Senate right now is supposed to address regional inequity, but realistically, it's terribly imbalanced. Would you consider looking into reforming the Senate? I mean, seriously reforming it, not just perhaps tweaking it here and there.
Well, the truth is, I don't think it will happen. I'm just being blunt with you. Like, I don't want to be one of those politicians that comes on air and tells you a bunch of stuff just to get your vote and then goes back on it. The Supreme Court ruled that abolishing the Senate requires 10 of 10 provinces. Even reforming it would require 7 provinces representing 50% of the population. We'd have to open the Constitution, which would begin a whole new can of worms about every other grievance that people have with the constitutional structure of the nation. And I don't think we would get to a consensus. I don't like the fact that our Senate is unelected. I fought for an elected Senate. In fact, when I was a teenager, I worked on the Senate election campaign of Ted Morton when the Alberta government was promoting Senate elections. I helped him as a volunteer at McMahon Stadium in Calgary, collecting signatures for him to run. So that's how far back my arguments for Senate democratization goes. What I would support is appointing the winners of elections that provincial governments hold in their provinces. So I would appoint the candidates that Albertans elect in their locally held vote. If any other province held similar elections, I would appoint the winner in those cases as well. So that's something doable, doesn't require constitutional change, and I want to promise only things I can actually do.
Good. That was the next question. I was going to ask if you would commit to appointing the ones we elect, because we do have some senators elect right now.
Yes.
I'm sure vacancies will be
They
coming.
should be appointed. They should be appointed. The elected ones should get an appointment to the
Yes. It's the best we can do without reforming the entire system. I know constitutional change is very difficult. I'll get to some familiar territory. Inflation, of course, is going wild. It's running rampant. There's a number of factors. I mean, government spending is a huge part of it, and borrowing, the energy costs as well. So in addressing inflation, though, I mean, how can we get that under control reasonably?
Well, 3 things. Let's start with what I call just inflation. When Trudeau started printing money to finance the half trillion he's had in the last 2 years, I predicted we have inflation. Why? Because throughout thousands of years of history, whenever dictators, emperors, prime ministers, presidents print money to pay their bills, create coins out of cheap copper, as they used to do, to pay for their opulent spending, they end up causing inflation. Why? Because more dollars chase fewer goods, which leads to higher prices. It's not rocket science. So I said this would happen. Now, so the first, that's what I call just inflation. So how would I stop that? Well, I'll phase out the deficit, cancel the $100 billion slush fund of spending Trudeau is promising, defund the CBC, cancel the infrastructure bank, which is a colossal boondoggle, and also root out other waste and mismanagement to get rid of our deficit, so there is no need for money printing. Secondly, I would axe the carbon tax. John Charest, Patrick Brown passionately support the carbon tax. They want higher gas prices as a stated policy objective. And of course, the Bank of Canada governor admitted this week that the carbon tax is adding to inflation. I would axe that tax to bring inflation down. And the third thing is, instead of creating cash, my free enterprise economy will create more of what cash buys. I'll remove the regulatory gatekeepers to produce more Canadian energy, to reduce taxes and regulation on our farmers so they can produce more affordable food. And I'll incentivize municipalities and sell off, as well as selling off 15% of federal buildings to turn into more housing, to get the regulatory gatekeepers who block housing construction out of the way and increase the supply by millions of housing units so that there's more housing to have. So in other words, stop printing cash and start creating more of what cash buys. That's my common sense solution to just inflation.
Okay, would deregulating some of the agricultural controls that do lead to inflation involve supply management? I mean, that's been proven to raise the cost of a lot of consumer staples with dairy goods and poultry products and such. And it was a large part of the past conservative leadership discussions.
I'm not proposing a change in that area, and the reason is that the farmers who own the quota have had to pay millions of dollars for it. And furthermore, if we bought them out, then it would cost more to do that than it would to keep the system that is in place right now. Overall, I do support more choice and freedom in the agricultural sector. That's why I was a part of the Harper government that got rid of the wheat board and unleashed the productivity of our grains in our western prairie provinces. And I'll also be reducing other taxes and simplifying regulations so that our farmers and ranchers can spend more time producing nutritious food and less time filling out paperwork and being hounded by government bureaucrats.
Great. So, in your campaign, do you plan on coming out west to Alberta pretty soon?
I do. I should point out I was already in Saskatchewan, the province of my parents' birth. My folks are from Saskatoon and Leoville in Saskatchewan. So I visited there. And of course, I'm from Calgary, as you know. I'm born and raised there. My folks still live there, so I'm going to be back to visit them and connect with my many Western family and friends in the great province of Alberta. And I'll make sure you know about it when I have a date nailed down.
Great. Thanks. Well, I hope we'll get the opportunity to talk when you do come out here. Is there anything else you'd add before I let you go?
Well, whenever someone comes to my office for a job, I always ask them, "Why do you want the job?" So I have to answer that question myself. I want to be prime minister to put you and every Canadian back in control of their own lives by making Canada the freest nation on earth. That's my purpose. That's what I've always believed, and that's why I'm in this.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Mr. Poilievre, and we'll be watching your campaign with interest.
Thank you for having me.